friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 23rd of April of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where according to information we have, according to mainly pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians have finished regrouping. The Ukrainian side reports that the formation of a powerful grouping of airborne assault troops as a part of the Dnepr troop group is fully completed. According to their data on the southern front, Russian forces have completed preparations and are ready to begin a large-scale summer offensive operation. So the pro-Ukrainian sources are talking about this group of forces, and according to their data, the Russians have concentrated 98 Airborne Division 7s, Airborne Division 104, Airborne Division 76, Airborne Division 106 Division, 11th Airborne Brigade, and 45th Brigade of Special Purposes. But the most important thing is that the Russians have concentrated these groups, these forces, in the area of the responsibilities of the group of forces Dnipro. But when talking about the group of forces Dnipro, their area of responsibility is located between the cities of Tokmak and Nargadar and Kherson and Crimea. So this is their area of responsibilities, which means that this group of forces may begin offensive operation both in the direction of the city of Zaporozhye and in the direction of the city of Kherson. So let's discuss everything in details. And another important thing, that if you remember, during the previous days, during the April of 2026, we received lots of updates about the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that took place in the western Zaporozhye direction, and as a result of this counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly. For example, these are the changes on the ground in the western Zaporozhye direction just from the 15th of April of 2026. So once again, this is, for example, the end of the 15th of April of 2026, this is the end of the 16th of April, this is the end of the 17th of April. Then after a small pause, the Ukrainians began or continued their counter-offensive operation in the area of the settlement of Primorska. So of course, from this perspective, very difficult to understand what exactly the Ukrainians were saying when they were saying that the Russians concentrated a big army in this area and are ready to begin the summer offensive operation, when the Ukrainians have improved significantly their positions in the western Zaporozhye direction. But everything is logic, because we need to understand that this is something like a pattern of this conflict. Every time before the beginning of any offensive operation, of any major offensive operation that have taken place since the beginning of the special military operation, both the Russians and the Ukrainians, probably 2-3 weeks before any major offensive operation, were concentrating their troops through the gray zone. So for example, now the Ukrainians are trying to do the same. During the previous days, since the beginning of April, the Ukrainians launched a major counter-offensive operation in the western Zaporozhye direction, just with one purpose: to take this gray zone under complete control and to create something like a strong buffer. And when Russians begin their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Zaporozhye, they will have to fight with these Ukrainians in this buffer zone. And the main purpose of this buffer zone, just to slow down the Russians and to be the first wave, the first defense wave of the armed forces of Ukraine. Most likely, the Ukrainians, according to information we have, finished the concentration of their troops through this western Zaporozhye gray zone, and they are ready to begin clashes with the Russians. And most likely the Russians will begin offensive operation in this area, because we are talking about 5 airborne divisions, which means that we are talking about around 40,000 soldiers, 40,000 troops that the Russians are planning to use for the offensive purposes. Most likely the Russians will try to attack from these positions both the city of Orekhov and the city of Zaporozhye itself. Because, for example, when talking about the city of Zaporozhye, the distance between the current edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the city of Zaporozhye itself is already around 16 kilometers. But when talking about the Zaporozhye agglomeration, then the distance would be just around 4 kilometers. Very difficult to say how exactly the Russians are going to launch or how going to develop this offensive operation. The Russians may continue offensive operation in the direction of the river of Konska. This is the blue line in this area, or the Russians may try to attack the city of Zaporozhye even through a former Dnepr river or the Kakhovka reservoir. So the Russians may try to use this territory for attacks, but if the Russians are able to do this, obviously this will surprise the Ukrainians a lot. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. As for the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were attacking vehicles and the logistics of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. Lots of videos were published, as you can see, which means that the Russians have already begun the preparation. They're trying to exhaust the positions and the logistics of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area, not just in the area of the settlement of Kamyshovacha, but also in the area of the city by the name of Orekhov. Lots of videos were published during the previous 24 hours, and we see an anomaly activity from the Russian side. But once again, as I told you at the beginning of this video, that the group of forces Dnepr is responsible not just for the western Zaporozhye direction, for the city of Orekhov and the city of Zaporozhye. The group of forces Dnepr is located in the area of the city of Kherson. And telling the truth, since the beginning of this month, a very big and anomaly activity of the Russians was recorded in this area as well. Just during the previous months, pro-Russian sources published probably dozens of videos of how they were bombing and attacking the city of Zaporozhye with aviation, with artillery. The Russians during this period of time have reduced significant number of fortified areas of the armored forces of Ukraine to ruins. And telling the truth, everything is possible, everything is ready, everything is possible, first of all, and the second thing is that everything is ready for the Kherson offensive operation as well. The population was evacuated. During the previous months, the Russians dealt significant damage to the Ukrainian logistics. Lots of videos were published how Russians were attacking vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine. So this territory is pretty exhausted. As of now, we don't know for sure the exact status of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area, but we know that there is a real shortage of manpower in Ukrainian forces, which means that once again everything is possible, and the Russians are ready also for any development of the situation.
If your stomach looks like this, your chest looks like this, and your back looks like this Monday.
Now let's move further and let's talk about the eastern Zaporozhye direction. We are going to talk about the area of responsibilities of the group of forces east. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded, and the changes are significant. The Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Charivna. Basically, the sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the armored forces of the Russian Federation caught the settlement of Charivna in pincers from the south, from the north, and from the east. Furthermore, just yesterday we received a video from the central part of the settlement of Gulyai-Polska, where the Russians were attacking the city with heavy flamethrower systems by the name of TOS. And here we can see the moment how the Russians were reducing to the ruins the central part of the city. And this video was published yesterday, and today different sources stated that the Russians have already captured up to 30% of the settlement of Gulyai-Polska, and that the Russians are keeping advancing also from the south, as you can see, from the east, and the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Gulyai-Polska from the north. According to these updates, we can make a conclusion that's most likely, and it seems that in coming days, in coming week, but obviously before the beginning of May holidays, the Russians will be able to capture everything to the east of these red lines. So we are talking about the settlements of Charivna, Gulyai-Polska, and the territory to the village of Gorka. And these positions and these new positions will open the Russians the way towards the northeastern parts of the Orekhov agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, the settlement of Milnyuk, which is located on the road crossings, as you can see, was heavily bombed by the Russians. The Russians attacked these territories with multiple launch rocket systems, and the Russians are trying to destroy the Ukraine's logistics that go through exactly this village, trying to pin down the Ukrainians and not allow them to redeploy their troops and to be flexible and mobile in the eastern Zaporozhye direction. And another important thing is that according to different sources, By the end of the 23rd of April of 2026, the Russians have captured up to 40 or even 50% of the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa. This information was provided and confirmed both by pro-Russian sources and by neutral mappers. So, which means that most likely the village of Verkhnya Tersa, as well as the settlement of Gulyai-Polsk and Cherivne, would be taken by Russians before the beginning of May holidays, and this will indicate the beginning of the major Russian offensive operation towards the city of Zaporozhye, which most likely will start right after the end of May holidays. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dnepr direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very important updates. If you remember, during the previous days, we were talking a lot that the Russians, as a result of a fast lightning attack, managed to break through Ukraine's defense to the northwest of the settlement of Alexandergrad to cross the river of Volcha, and the Russians began concentration of their troops on the territory of this Novopavlovsky forest. And today we received the video that confirmed at least partially these updates. In this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians along the river of Volcha with FPV drones. So in this video we can see how the Russians first of all were trying to cross the river of Volcha at multiple places, and the Ukrainians were attacking them with FPV drones, which means that indeed most likely the Russians have positions on the Ukrainian side of the settlement, and now the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. If Russians are able to do this, they will receive probably the most interesting foothold through the entire direction. As for the Dnepr direction and as for the Dobropolye direction, during the previous 24 hours, several videos were published how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and how the Russians were attacking objects of energy infrastructure. In this video, we can see a substation that was attacked by Russians in the area of the settlement by the name of Vasilievskaya, and the Russians attacked another substation in the northern parts of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Glukhov and Shostka.
Du har store planer for din fremtid. Det har din chef ikke. Af og til har du brug for en A-kasse. Af og til er en A-kasse.
Makrel eller tun 10 kroner. Harvest bedst frostgrønt også 10 kroner. Gå i Netto.
As for the Dobropolye direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. Just several videos were published how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, but without changes on the ground. The same situation is taking place in the area of the settlement of Konstantinovka. Probably today was the first day when we haven't received anything on this matter. During the previous week, we received lots of updates almost every single day. The map was adjusted in the Russian favor, but as of the previous 24 hours, as you can see, no changes on the ground. Either the Russians are regrouping or the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation or to introduce additional reinforcements in this area. The Slaviansk direction during the previous 24 hours, very interesting updates were received from the area of Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. These are the changes on the ground between the dates, and as you can see here, we have an anomaly activity of the Russians. Since the beginning of months, we received lots of updates right exactly from this area, especially from the villages of Tikhonovka and Malinovka. Furthermore, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians improved their infiltration zones in this region, and the Russians have almost completely took the complete control the Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal, at least the Russian side of canal. Furthermore, as for the area between the villages of Markov and Novomarkov on the Ukrainian side of canal, we see that according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions here as well. So to tell the truth, I won't be surprised if Russians has decided to test and to check the defense capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine on their side of canal. And it seems that the Russians right now have a small task to establish complete control or to check whether the Russians are able to capture the villages of Malinovka and Tikhonovka. And of course, there is big stronghold between the villages, because it seems that the Russians decided to check the Ukrainian's defense, and if the Russians are able to take under complete control these territories, this can lead to completely unpredictable consequences, not just to the Slaviansk direction, but also to the city of Kramatorsk, because these are going to be few more villages on the Ukrainian side of canal, and from these positions, the Russians, of course, may try to move even further in the western direction to attack the city of Kramatorsk, or at least to get as close as possible to the main logistic lines that go between the cities in the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. If Russians can establish physical or fire control over this road, of course, this will bring significant problems to the armed forces of Ukraine. By the way, today the head of office of the president of Ukraine, Budanov, stated that the armed forces of Ukraine prepared some kind of surprise to Russians in the Donetsk region. As of the previous 24 hours, we received a video of how Ukrainians were attacking a building in the central part of the city of Donetsk, and the Ukrainians are saying that as a result of attack, they managed to damage a building where the special forces of the Russian Federation were located, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that there were lots of casualties among them. As you can see, the Ukrainians used dozens of drones just with the purpose to attack a certain block of this building, which means that the Ukrainians knew who exactly was located in this part of the building. Lots of explosions, once again, lots of casualties among the Russian officers were recorded as a result of this attack. But most likely this is not the surprise the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Budanov, was talking about. Now let's move further. As for the Liman direction, small changes were recorded. According to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians improved their positions or managed to infiltrate through Russian positions and to force the Russians to fall back towards the dense network of the fortifications between the settlements of Zarechny and Liman itself. So this is not a counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. This is the most important thing we need to understand. This is something similar as we discussed and described today through the western Zaporozhye direction. The Ukrainians see that the Russians prepare the Liman major offensive operation that either is going to take place within the next several days before May holidays or right after the May holidays. So that is why the Ukrainians right now are trying to take under complete control the gray zone and the buffer between the city of Liman and the settlement of Zarechny, with the purpose to prepare the city of Liman before the major battle for this area. So this is something like this. Most likely the Russians were keeping some units in this area, but more just like reconnaissance troops to understand the situation in the city itself. But I would like to remind you that several days ago, the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov, stated that up to 70% of the settlement of Liman is already under complete Russian control. The Kupiansk direction. During the previous day, we received lots of videos published from the area between the villages of Osinova and Vasilivka. As you can see, 4 geolocations. We won't watch these videos due to contents of this video, but according to this video, the Ukrainians began retreating from the eastern bank of the river Oskol in the western direction. So every single video, every single episode of this video was showing how the Ukrainians were retreating from the eastern bank of the river Oskol, from the settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlavoy, and from the area of the settlement of Kupiansk, from the eastern bank of the river Oskol towards positions, towards the Ukrainian positions on the western bank, which means that the Ukrainians most likely started a complete evacuation from the eastern bank with the purpose to save their soldiers and their personnel. So which means that most likely the battle for the eastern bank indeed would be finished by Russians and by the end of April and before the beginning of May holidays. The Kharkiv direction, the Russians are about to finish the battle for a foothold along the river of Volcha. These are the changes on the ground between the previous 2 days. This is the end of the 21st of April, for example. This is the end of the 22nd of April. And this is the end of the 23rd of April of 2026. The Russians answered the settlement of Bochkor from the north. We have a video confirming this. Here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers in this area. And here we have a video how Russians, as a result of attack, destroyed destroyed the only bridge that the Ukrainians have in this area for support purposes. The bridge was destroyed right now in front of your screen, so we can see exactly how it happened. This bridge was destroyed here, and the Ukrainians were using this bridge to support their contingent on the territory of Boykova. So now, which means that the battle for this settlement of Bochka will intensify, and most likely during the next several days the village would be taken by Russians, and we will color everything, at least at this part of the river of Volcha, under complete Russian control. So the battle for this part of the Volchansky bridgehead is about to finish. As for the Sumy direction, the most important thing, according to different sources, the Ukrainians have redeployed the 425th Assault Regiment Skala. So this is an assault regiment that the Ukrainians always use to stabilize the situation through the entire line of combat contact. Before the Sumy direction, this 425th separate assault regiment was located in the area of the city of Gulyai-Polya. This regiment was counterattacking Russian positions to the west of the river of Gaichur in the area of the city of Gulyai-Polya, but at the end of March the Ukrainians stopped their counteroffensive operation. After a very short regrouping, the regiment was redeployed in the direction of the city of Sumy, most likely with the purpose to stabilize the situation between the settlements of Novodmitrievka, Taraturina, Pokrovka and Ryasna. So in coming days, most likely we'll see lots of updates on this matter, lots of media counterattacks from the Ukrainian side with the purpose to show that the situation is stable and that there is no threat to the city of Sumy in this direction. So most likely in this direction in coming days we'll see lots of updates, and they're going to be very hot situation. We've covered most of the updates about this conflict on the territory of Ukraine when talking about the situation on the ground. The sources are saying that in coming days the Russians are going to launch another massive attack. Most likely this is going to happen even during the next 36 hours and right before the last Russian waves of attacks before the beginning of May holidays. As of the end of the 23rd of April of 2026, the Parliament of Ukraine still hasn't extended the martial law and the mobilization in Ukraine, and this is a very critical situation because before the end of the current stage, the current phase of the martial law and mobilization, the Parliament of Ukraine doesn't have lots of time. The current martial law will expire somewhere on the 6th of May of 2026, so basically within the next 2 weeks or so. Another important thing is that the Russians today launched another Angara rockets with the purpose to deploy additional satellites on the low orbit and the mid orbits of the Earth in favor and in interest of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. The Angara 1.2 rocket, after launch from Plisetsk Cosmodrome, puts military satellites into target orbits in the interests of the Russian Minister of Defense. Ground forces of the space forces took them under control, the department reported. So as you can see, the Russians have intensified the usage of rockets and satellites these days. Almost every single week we receive the report about another launch. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of April, we will see that during these months the Russians launched satellites on the 17th of April, on the 3rd of April, and now on the 23rd of April of 2026. So at least 3 launches were recorded just during the previous months. Once again, 3rd of April, 23rd of April, and 17th of April. So as you can see, almost every single week, the Russians launch another batch of satellites to the orbits of our planet. Most likely we're talking about low orbit satellites that provide the internet connection and the communication for the Russian troopers. And of course, we're talking about spy satellites. We see that the Russians are continuing intensifying their satellites grouping of forces, and of course we start receiving more and more updates about the results of Russian attacks with drones deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, which means that most likely we can make a conclusion that these Russian drones began working and began providing the Russians significant results.